A miller's daughter, locked in a tower, forced to spin straw into gold. A mysterious little man who appears in the night, a terrible bargain, a name that saves everything. But the tale you were told as a child barely scratches the surface of what's really happening here. The truth is that Rumpelstiltskin isn't just some quaint German fairy tale. What we're looking at is a 4,000-year-old story that each civilization has rewritten to encode their deepest fears. Like an ancient scroll written over again and again, each era has added its own layer of meaning, its own warnings, its own desperate attempts to make sense of power and exploitation. And if you know how to read between the lines, you can see them all. But first, we need to understand the story. In the tale as it's commonly told, a miller boasts that his daughter can spin straw into gold. The king, greedy and ruthless, locks her in a tower and demands the impossible: produce gold by morning or die. Desperate, the girl is visited by a strange little man who offers to spin the straw into gold for a price. First, he demands her necklace. Though she succeeds, the king's greed only grows. So on the second night, her ring. And on the third night, with nothing left to give, he demands her firstborn child. She agrees. The gold is spun. The king, now rich beyond measure, keeps his promise and marries her. When the child is born, the creature returns to collect what is his. She pleads for another way. He gives her one. If she can guess his name in 3 days, she may keep the child. She sends messengers across the land, gathering names far and wide. On the final night, armed with the truth, she speaks it, Rumpelstiltskin, and with that single word, the spell is broken. The creature rages, tears himself apart, and vanishes into the earth. That is the story as we know it. But to find its 4,000-year-old secret, we must dig deeper into the Bronze Age. Travel back 4,000 years to the very first layer of this story. You're in a Bronze Age settlement, somewhere between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The walls are mud brick, the roof is thatched with reeds, and an old woman is telling a story by firelight. But she's not talking about spinning wheels. Those won't be invented for another 1,000 years. She's talking about the forge. In the hills of ancient Anatolia, the first smiths worked their craft in secret, often at night, away from the suspicious eyes of their communities. The forge glowed like a portal to the underworld. Smoke billowed into the darkness, and then came the miracle. Grey rocks went into the fire, and gold emerged. To witness this was to see magic itself. These metalworkers were both feared and essential. They knew the secret names of ores, the hidden words that transformed stone to treasure. Villages whispered that smiths had made pacts with underground spirits, that they spoke to demons in the flames. In Norse mythology, which would emerge from these same fears, the dwarven smiths lived beneath the earth, creating magical objects, but always demanding terrible payments. Wayland the smith was imprisoned and crippled by a king who wanted his skills. Rumpelstiltskin isn't an imp at all. He's the memory of these first metalworkers, these holders of dangerous knowledge. The straw into gold isn't about textiles. It's about the terrifying alchemy of turning worthless earth into precious metal. The daughter represents the community, forced to bargain with powers they don't understand. And the child is the future, the next generation that will either master this technology or be enslaved by it. This Bronze Age foundation established the story's core, an impossible transformation, a mysterious helper with secret knowledge, a terrible price, and the desperate need to gain control over forces beyond human understanding. As the story traveled along trade routes, from Babylon to Egypt to the Hebrew kingdoms, it encountered cultures obsessed with the magical power of names. This is where the second layer was written, transforming a tale about metallurgy into something far more supernatural. The ancient Egyptians had long known this truth. There's a story carved into temple walls about how the goddess Isis gained ultimate power over Ra, the sun god himself. She created a serpent from Ra's own saliva mixed with dust. When it bit him, the venom burned through his divine body like acid. Ra screamed in agony, But Isis would only heal him if he revealed his secret name, the true name he had hidden since the beginning of time. Finally, writhing in unbearable pain, Ra whispered it to her alone. In that instant, she gained power over the sun itself. This wasn't mythology to them, it was cosmic law. Names weren't labels, they were leashes. To name was to control. During this era, Rumpelstiltskin transformed from a smith into a demon. The Babylonians had their Utuku, the Hebrews their Shadim, the Greeks their daimones. These were beings who existed between worlds, who could be summoned or banished by those who knew their true names. The story now became about a young woman who makes a pact with such a being, and her salvation comes not from mastering technology, but from discovering the demon's true name. In Jewish communities of this period, parents would deliberately give children false names to confuse the angel of death. They called healthy babies Alter, old, or Neke, sickly, to throw malevolent spirits off the scent. The Rumpelstiltskin story reinforced this crucial survival knowledge. Never give your true name to a stranger, and always seek to discover the true names of those who would control you. By the Middle Ages, the story had settled into European soil, and here it absorbed the anxieties of feudalism, where your entire life could be destroyed by the whim of a lord. The king character emerges in this layer, not in the Bronze Age version, not in the demonic version, but here, where absolute monarchy was the ultimate earthly power. The medieval mind understood this story differently. The miller, often a minor town official who controlled the grain supply, represented the emerging merchant class, ambitious, dishonest, willing to sacrifice anything for advancement. His lie about his daughter's ability wasn't about magic, it was about the deadly politics of court life. One wrong word to a lord could mean death, but the medieval layer added something else, the predatory undertone. In 1577, Johann Fischart documented a children's game called Rumpelstilt, where one child would mimic a twisted, limping figure who burst into homes demanding payment. The adults watching would roar with laughter at the double meanings the children didn't understand. The name itself was a bawdy joke about male anatomy, about things that were wrinkled and small and ridiculous. The medieval mind saw in Rumpelstiltskin something their Bronze Age ancestors couldn't have imagined, the threat of forced intimacy within marriage. The imp makes 3 nocturnal visits to a young woman locked alone in a room. He performs his miracle and then demands escalating payment. In medieval German, making gold was a known euphemism for conception. The story became a warning to young women about the transactional nature of marriage, where their bodies and their children were currency in male negotiations. Then came the machines, and everything changed again. The story that had survived Bronze Age forges and medieval castles was about to encounter its most radical transformation yet, as the Industrial Revolution rewrote the very meaning of labor, gender, and human value. Walk through any German village in 1750, and you'd hear the rhythmic whir of spinning wheels from every cottage. Women spun while they sang, while they gossiped, while they watched their children. The thread they created clothed their families, and any surplus could be sold at market. A skilled spinner was a valuable wife. Her wheel was her independence, her craft, her identity. The word spinster meant a woman of substance, someone who could support herself. But by 1850, those wheels had fallen silent. The cotton mills of Manchester and the textile factories of the Ruhr Valley had mechanized what was once women's work. The songs were replaced by the deafening roar of power looms. Women who once controlled their own production now stood for 14 hours beside machines they didn't own, creating wealth for factory owners while their own children went hungry. In this industrial layer, Rumpelstiltskin becomes the factory itself, a male-coded force that can produce impossible quantities, straw into gold, but demands everything in return. The impossible task is no longer about magic or demons. It's about the crushing production quotas of industrial capitalism. The firstborn child represents generational debt, the way industrial poverty trapped families for generations. The The fairy tale had become a dark mirror of the factory floor. The brothers Grimm, writing in this era, understood this perfectly. When they collected their tales between 1812 and 1857, they were watching their world transform. That's why they changed the ending. Picture Wilhelm and Jakob Grimm in their study in Kassel, Germany, in 1857. The room smells of pipe tobacco and old paper. Outside their window, the German states are consolidating. Nationalism is rising like a fever, and every story must serve the cause of moral instruction. In the original oral versions they collected, when Rumpelstiltskin's name was revealed, he simply admitted defeat and flew out the window on a cooking ladle. A bit ridiculous, even comical, the ending of a trickster tale. But this wouldn't do for the new Germany they were helping to create. Wilhelm dips his pen and crosses out the imp's comical exit. Too soft, too forgiving. Children must learn that evil is destroyed absolutely. Jacob nods as his brother writes the new ending. The imp, seized by rage, drives his leg so deep into the earth that his whole body tears in two. Blood and viscera. Total annihilation. This wasn't organic evolution. It was calculated editorial violence, adding a fifth layer to our ancient tale. The Grimms needed absolute moral clarity. Evil must not merely lose, it must be obliterated. But notice what they didn't change. The king, whose greed created this entire situation, still lives happily ever after. The patriarchal system that endangered the girl remains intact. Only the supernatural outsider is destroyed. The story was now set in its most famous form, but its evolution wasn't over. As the world moved beyond kingdoms, its next battlefield became the human mind. The 20th century added the final layer we know today, when psychologists began to see fairy tales as maps of the human psyche. Carl Jung and his followers recognized Rumpelstiltskin as what they called the shadow archetype, the dark, unacknowledged aspects of the self or society. In this reading, every character represents a part of the psyche. The miller is our social ambition, the king our superego's impossible demands, the daughter our vulnerable ego caught between forces beyond our control, and Rumpelstiltskin. He's everything we refuse to acknowledge about ourselves, our greed, our inappropriate desires, our rage at being powerless. The story becomes about integration. The daughter must confront this shadow figure, learn its name, which means understanding its true nature, and thereby reclaim her power. The child represents new life, creativity, the future self that can only emerge when we've faced our demons and named them. Modern trauma therapy has confirmed what the story always knew. Unnamed threats hold infinite power over us. The abuser whose actions are never acknowledged. The addiction no one will name. The family trauma that everyone pretends doesn't exist. These are our Rumpelstiltskins, spinning in the dark rooms of our psyche, demanding ever greater payments. Here's what makes Rumpelstiltskin truly extraordinary. All these layers are simultaneously true. The story works because each interpretation builds upon rather than replaces the others. When you read it now, you're not just reading a German fairy tale. You're reading 4,000 years of human beings trying to understand power, exploitation, and liberation. You're seeing Bronze Age metallurgy and Egyptian name magic, medieval gender dynamics and industrial capitalism, nationalist moralizing and psychological insight. The core message has remained consistent across all these transformations. There exists a force that can perform miraculous transformations, but demands a terrible price. This force is both necessary and dangerous. It operates in shadow, in the margins, in the locked rooms where young women are sent to perform impossible tasks, and the only way to defeat it is to name it, to identify exactly what it is, speak that truth aloud, and watch its power crumble. This is why Rumpelstiltskin endures. Not because it's a quaint tale about a funny little man with a silly name, but because it's an instruction manual that's been updated for 4 millennia. Each generation has recognized the pattern and added their own warnings. The Bronze Age warned about dangerous knowledge. The ancient world warned about supernatural contracts. The medieval period warned about coerced consent. The industrial age warned about capitalist exploitation. The Grimms warned about moral absolutism. The modern era warns about psychological shadows. But the solution has never changed. Name the thing that oppresses you. Identify it precisely. Speak its true name aloud, because unnamed power is infinite power. But once you can articulate exactly what controls you, whether it's an abusive system, a psychological trauma, or an impossible expectation, you can break its hold. The miller's daughter starts the story with zero agency, traded between men like property. She ends it as a queen who has defeated a supernatural threat through her own intelligence. She saves herself not through violence or magic or the intervention of a prince, but through knowledge and language. 4,000 years, countless cultures, one message, encoded again and again. Learn the true name of what controls you, speak it aloud, and watch its power tear itself apart.